Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you all, and welcome to this FEMYSO Now session. This is me, I'm Rueda. I'm a member of the 25th anniversary team of FEMYSO, and I will be hosting today's session. So I hope you got your tea, coffee, or whatever in a comfortable seat, because we will have an interesting conversation with an exciting lineup of guest speakers. Before I introduce them to you, first, for the ones who don't know, FEMYSO Now is a live stream and podcast series by FEMYSO, and it's live on both YouTube and Facebook. And also for the ones who don't know, FEMYSO is the Forum of European Muslim Youth and Student Organizations. And this year, 2021, is an exciting year because it marks our 25th anniversary. So I'm happy to introduce to you our guest speakers. Firstly, Intissar Kheriggi. She's the former president of FEMYSO and currently a member of the board of trustees. She just finished her PhD, so congratulations. And the other guest speaker is Hajar Al-Kaddo. She is the former vice president of FEMYSO and also a member of the board of trustees. She's a research associate at the Coventry University and is finishing her PhD, inshallah, at the University of College Dublin. So that about the speakers. Before we start, I really want to emphasize that we appreciate active participation in this conversation. So write down your questions as a reaction below, and we will definitely look into them and ask them at the end of this session. So today's topic is civil society organizations and their road to change. Actually, this was mentioned in a previous FEMYSO Now session, and in this session, we will focus on this. So we will talk about the civil society organizations, about shrinking, the causes of it, and what this means for Muslim youth and the role of FEMYSO in it. So if I start with Intissar, what is civil society? What are civil society organizations and why are they important?
Okay, that's a theoretical question to start with. But I think, if we start by defining, because, we academics like to define things. And I think if we start by defining what is civil society is basically everything that we do that's outside sort of the state. Mm-hmm. So, the activities that we do that are organized sort of by citizens, by themselves. So, whether you're in scouting or you're in a student society or you're in a charity or you're in student activism, for example, all of these things are civil society. So I think civil society is a big space, which is pretty diverse and pretty broad. And I think it's worth mentioning as well that civil society has a very strong history in Islam. Because, before even, in Europe, the term civil society was developed, by political philosophers. In Islam, actually, society has always played a very important role in providing for the needs of the members of society. And so, in Islam, you had awqaf, endowments or waqf, which was a way for actually members of society to organize themselves and to donate and to make sure that different groups of people were looked after. So you had like foundations, awqaf for animals, for poor people, for education, for women, all these for, medicine and medical facilities. So I think civil society is really a sphere in which we can learn a lot. We can organize ourselves. We can pursue, interests that we find will develop us. And obviously, FEMYSO is an important part of civil society. It's a space where young people can actually develop their skills and work on the issues that they're passionate about.
Clear. And why are they important? Why are these organizations important?
I think that they're important to people for different reasons. If you think about it, when once, apart from the family, which is the first thing that we are, born into, and apart from school, all of our most sort of meaningful experiences in life, all the skills that we learn, a lot of it happens in civil society. I mean, for me, I can say, for example, that, I got involved in scouting when I was about, 9 years old, in Muslim Scouts, actually, in the UK, which is a member of FEMYSO, member organization of FEMYSO. That was somewhere that I learned a lot of skills. It gives you the space to be outside your family, to be outside your comfort zone, to develop your identity, to develop your confidence. And so it's really, I think, a lot of education actually happens not in school, but it happens in civil society, in these different activities that we do outside our kind of formal education.
Right, right. And what do you think is the role of civil society organizations in democracy and in decision-making processes?
Well, I mean, democracy is a system which can only work if different groups of people fight for their interests.
Yeah.
So, you have companies, you have the private sector, which is very active in democracy, but you also have citizens who have to organize themselves. There's sometimes a kind of conflict between the private sector and civil society and the state, because, these are kind of the three elements of our democratic system, right? And I think we can all see that civil society has a very important role because, for example, everybody is talking about environmental awareness and sustainability. If it weren't for civil society organizations who started talking about this in the 1960s and 70s, we wouldn't even be talking about that. Companies would not today be finding it fashionable to talk about being ethical, to talk about being sustainable. And that's all because of the efforts of civil society organizations, right? Same thing with the civil rights movement. Obviously you have generations starting, from the 1950s and 60s until Black Lives Matter today. But a lot of changes in our systems have happened because people have gotten together in social movements, in organizations. And that's what civil society is about. It's really creating spaces where people with similar kind of interests and similar causes can come together. And ultimately, the idea is to change things, to change laws, to change policies, and to change reality.
Okay, and if I direct this question to Hajar, if we talk about the shrinking space for civil society, what do we mean with this?
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. Firstly, let me just clarify, I'm a former board of trustee. I no longer want to. Yes, okay. So I no longer want to be in that age group. Thank you very much. But no offense, Intissar, obviously. But I think Intissar made some really, really kind of clear points of what civil society does, how they challenge policy, politics, thinking, how they organize and advocate. But you're asking me whether, what does a shrinking space for civil society look like? Well, I think that's a really interesting question. And I think it really depends on the context that you're living in. I think in some contexts, there is a shrinking space for civil society, but I don't believe in our European, especially Irish context, or even British that I'm here right now, I've seen very little of so far. There is a shrinking space for civil society. Maybe they're termed differently. Maybe they don't organize in the same ways they used to. Maybe we just don't call them civil society organizations. But I don't see a shrinking space for these types of organizations. But again, I'm looking at it from a very kind of, an Irish perspective here. So for example, let's think about interfaith work and Muslim communities and civil society organizations in Ireland actually from what I see, they're on the rise. They're on, they're advocating, they're challenging policy on different levels. They're conducting research and allowing for the voice of, civilians and citizens to be heard on so many different levels. So maybe in comparison to France, where, civil society organizations, institutions are, being silenced, let's put it that way, because that's what's happening, isn't it? Is as a huge challenge. I guess it shrinks as well when, the space shrinks as well when there is no funding allocated, for example. So from a European level, when you see the funding is being redirected to maybe, different types of civil society organizations, or even private sector institutions or research or in think tanks, that's where you see maybe a shrinking space. But as I said, it really depends on where you are, where you're seated, and the perspective and context. But yeah, it means a lot of things for us if we don't have funding, if we are not able to exercise our voices and challenge, the politics and policy in a country, for example. That means a lot of negative, a negative space for us, and that's kind of what I see.
Yeah. And Intissar, what do you think about this?
Well, I agree definitely with Hajar that the context, is really different in different European countries. So I think that's one of the interesting things about FEMYSO as well, is that it gives you an insight into what's happening in different countries. So you can, if you're a British Muslim, or you're a French Muslim, or you're a Dutch Muslim, you're used to being very much stuck to your context. And FEMYSO gives you the opportunity to actually look at what's happening in other countries. And sometimes that can be a good thing when you realize that actually sometimes other countries are ahead of you, and that's a good thing because you can take some ideas from other countries. And sometimes they're more challenging than your own context, and that makes you grateful for what you have, because, for example, if you look at the UK, I think we're very fortunate compared to, for example, somewhere like France, where, the Muslim community is really facing a lot of really terrible, challenges at the moment. And so, this should, I think, make us work harder. When you see shrinking civil space in a different country, this should make us work harder to protect the space that we have in the countries we are in, right? And then the second perspective, I think that maybe might be a bit different, because I'm also, at the moment, I'm living outside Europe, and in Tunisia, in North Africa. And this gives me another perspective, because, again, sort of stepping away from our own national contexts, you see that actually, in Europe, we have a lot of opportunities. It's true that there are a lot of challenges. It's true that there is Islamophobia. There are huge challenges. But at the same time, when you compare them to the challenges that people face around the world, whether it's people who are, living on, less than $1 a day, I'm basically thinking about how to just get the basics for, sort of feeding their families. Or you see countries like, Burma, or like Egypt, or, other countries, the Rohingya Muslims, etc., who are facing really, people who, when they speak out, they face the risk of, death, basically. And so that kind of puts it into perspective as well, I think, that in Europe, we have our challenges, but we are in a very comfortable position compared to other countries around the world. And so we should feel more of a responsibility to actually make sure that we're using the space that we have, to actually, raise issues, within our communities and that we're facing, but also issues that are happening to others around the world.
Yeah, very good points. Yeah, actually, it's very good to think also about the privileges we have as Muslims living in European countries. Indeed. So you both have been active in FEMYSO for a long time, and you have, I guess, experienced this as well. So if we talk about this challenge, about this problem, that we can see it in perspective, indeed. compared to people in other circumstances. But within Europe, if we talk about this challenge and within your experience in FEMYSO, how did you personally experience this challenge within the organization? Maybe I can direct it to Hajar.
I'm more curious to know what the challenge is exactly. Are we talking about the shrinking space?
Yeah,
for civil society as a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
Thing is,
you think about it otherwise?
That's a problem here, is that I'm an eternal optimist.
Yeah.
So I don't see it as a challenge. I see it as an opportunity if this space is shrinking, because if we are seeing something that's shrinking, what do we do? We find different methods of getting our voice out there.
Yeah.
Right now we live in an online era, for example, and getting our voice out there via online means, similar to what you're doing here, is a way to combat issues of, shrinking spaces for civil societies. Let's not forget, revolutions have been made, across the world, and, where Intissar is and elsewhere, just via people coming together through online means. So I actually think that things, when the space is shrinking, we have to, hire our voices through different means. And then also we need to look for different avenues to make sure that our voice isn't taken away, whether it's, as I said, via online means, or whether it's by political lobbying or whatever else. Or, for example, it could be simply connecting with other agencies and groups like interfaith action within that sphere, or like Intissar quite rightly said, about the climate and sustainability kind of issues. There is a shrinking space maybe for Muslim youth in certain countries, but I do not see this as a challenge. I see it as an opportunity for us to do what we need to do, which is represent Islamic values, represent Muslim youth, but inshallah we will continue to do it through FEMYSO and those kind of means. But also simultaneously, we need to remember that we can do it through so many means, through the interfaith platforms, through partnerships, with others generally. So I'm sorry if I didn't really answer your question. I've done the political, the politician kind of a way of answering, as Intissar quite rightly reminded me of earlier today. And truly, that's kind of, this is the way we have to look at it,
Yeah, I really like your optimistic attitude towards it. So to see it as an opportunity, to see it as a way, as an opportunity to work harder on it and to have a louder voice, actually. What do you think about this, Intissar?
Yeah, I would join Hajar in being an eternal optimist. Because I really think that's the Islamic perspective. Honestly, I don't think that, some people see optimistic people as like naive or being, wishful in their thinking. But actually, if you're not optimistic, you're not going to change anything around you.
True.
If you only see the negativity, if you only see, what realism as being, okay, everything is going to stay the way it is forever. Well, if everybody was like that, then the world would never have changed, and the world would not have invented new things. Injustices would not have been lifted in different parts of the world. People who fought against colonialism, for example. I mean, that was a much bigger challenge for that generation than fighting against Islamophobia, for example, because colonialism was actually a whole system of, occupation and legal sort of sovereignty over other countries. So I think that what Hajar mentioned, I think the first thing, building partnerships, is very important.
Yeah.
And that's something we worked on in FEMYSO during our mandates, because if you look at any issue around the world, especially if you're a minority and you're working on raising an issue that concerns your community, working as a minority is not going to get you very far. You have to join hands with others and there are plenty of other people who are sort of justice loving, who actually, as we can see now with the Palestinian conflict, and more non-Palestinians than Palestinians are involved. And sometimes more non-Muslims you find than Muslims even. In some organizations, like in the UK, like Palestine Solidarity Campaign, there are a lot of white non-Muslim British people who are, fighting for causes that are not personally theirs, but which they've adopted because they believe in them. And so I think it's really important to get other people on board. So, when we were in FEMYSO, we built partnerships in the EXCO. I mean, we built partnerships through Interfaith. Interfaith was a very important way to sort of address issues to do with Islamophobia and others. We also were involved in different organizations like the Council of Europe, the Advisory Council on Youth in the Council of Europe. We were involved in setting up a coalition of, organizations in 8 countries working on Islamophobia, but they were not all Muslim organizations. So it's really important, I think, to build partnerships and to bring other people on board, which also means adopting other people's causes as well, and getting involved in different issues. So I think that's one thing. And I think it's really important to, remember that our mission as Muslims is not to just care about Muslim specific issues. And that was something we tried to also work on, is really sort of not to be defined purely by Islamophobia and the challenges that we have, but to be positive and proactive and tackle the issues that actually face our societies, our European societies. And so, for example, we worked on environmental issues. I think we were the first sort of mandate in FEMYSO to work on environmental issues, because usually, Muslim organizations will say, well, we have so many priorities. This is not our priority to work on the environment. We have a million different problems. We need to build more mosques, or we need to combat this issue, or we need to work on, poverty, or, whatever it is, or we need to send money abroad. And, there's always a way to say, we don't have time to talk about this. But actually, our religion is, tells us that we have a collective responsibility for the earth. And so, it's kind of, you can't really say it's not my responsibility, it's somebody else's. And so, we worked on that. Hajar actually led the campaign, the first campaign we had on the environment, which is Clean Up My Community campaign. And, we got a lot of Muslim youth around Europe who were energized, who organized all these events on the importance of the environment and Islam. And even for me, I can personally say that it really changed the way that I think about my responsibility towards the environment. There are things I still do. I mean, like, through that campaign, we learned the hadith on, the importance of, for example, how you use resources, natural resources, like the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ about water, that when you do wudu, even if you're next to a stream, you should only use, a small amount. And that's just, that's not just about water. It's also about the way we consume generally everything, all these natural resources around us. And so I think it's really important to actually remember, our mission also doesn't extend to just defending ourselves and our existence, but also trying to improve, other issues that are affecting our world.
Yeah. And then in that way, building bridges actually by focusing on on society as a whole, and not only Muslims who build bridges. So you talked about projects focused on interreligious dialogue. So could you maybe give an example of this?
I assume you're talking to me.
Sorry, yeah.
Well, yeah, no, absolutely. Firstly, I'm extremely happy to hear that Intissar, Dr. Kheriggi, I should say, has learned so much from the Green Up My Community campaign. That's an honor and a privilege on my part. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Allah yaftah alayk Intissar. But generally, yeah, from an interfaith dialogue, an interreligious dialogue, FEMYSO's had a really rich experience actually in this regard. And alhamdulillah, it's been many years and many people over and over who have kind of established our connections with people like, our Christian counterparts like the EYCE, or even our Jewish counterparts in Europe, and so on and so forth. In the last couple of years, actually, we've teamed up with the European Council of Churches, and we have, well, I say we, the past tense really, have spoken on very important issues, human rights issues, and from an Islamophobia and a phobia type perspective. And there's been a lot of movement around this. Via FEMYSO, different campaigns were led. Even Green Up My Community, for example, we had a green counterpart in the Christian version of us, so in EYCE, and that was a brilliant perspective, and a brilliant. It just showed actually the importance of our, faith values in these very important issues like, climate change and climate action and so on. More recently, actually, via work with the European Council of Churches, we've actually since then, actually, so it's about two years ago, before the pandemic, we started thinking about a women's organization, which is was a platform from the FEMYSO work and the FEMYSO network and the partnerships that has become now this international network for female religious leaders. We call it For Real, and it's actually something that post FEMYSO I've been able to work on personally, but it's been so enriching in so many ways to be working alongside women, leaders, theologians, people of excellence, and people from different faiths, to further the causes that Intissar, quite rightly mentioned, that were ours and that were theirs. And I think that has played a huge role in a lot of the work that I have done personally in the last while. But I think FEMYSO's role in this has been tremendous, quite frankly. That these partnerships have lasted us, mashallah, and before I came into it, there was people working on this good 15 years before me. So these partnerships have stayed and have consistently had outputs that have benefited FEMYSO and these other faith groups. So we're dealing with a huge issue right now, as Muslims, as youth, from a European perspective, from an international perspective. We're talking about an Israel and Palestinian conflict, and from my perspective, interfaith has a really central role in this. Listen, we're not going to sit around shaking each other's hands and talking about peace and reconciliation for the rest of our days, but there are actions that we can take and remind each other of, injustice, human rights, equalities in these lands. When we take ourselves away from the anger and the upset of these situations, we can rely on things like interfaith action and dialogue to start creating change. And I think something recently that came up in the discussion I had even was beginning of this week, yes, Tuesday, with the board. And we talked about what can we actually do. And we were thinking of things like changing and understanding the narrative, like how has social media changed the narrative of this, international political situation and religious conflict, if you like. And so we were talking about, well, actually, how can we as interfaith groups and people of faith and women leaders challenge these big, entities that are controlling the media? And how can we actually, another avenue was, how can we talk to people who may be youth in Israel, so Israeli youth and Palestinian youth, and hear from them, because we would be connected. In the end of the day, some of these people have been born into this situation, so we need to hear about what's happening, on the ground. And I know a lot of Muslims would wag their fingers at me probably and tut. But genuinely, if we're not listening and understanding each other and using interfaith platforms to do so, we're not going to benefit anybody, and we're definitely not going to benefit ourselves. So, So that for me is a super important point in terms of the interfaith action dialogue. And I don't like to call it interreligious dialogue. I like to call it interfaith action, because we don't want to be sitting around talking about things anymore. And, you know, singing Kumbaya, for goodness sake. We want to start, you know, actually doing something about these big, you know, challenges, even if it's just a little step, even if it's just something really small, you know, correcting misinformation, you know, challenging people who have blocked, you know, I don't know, social media, you know, posts, and mobilizing towards doing good together. So inshallah, you know.
Inshallah, that's really beautiful. Yeah. To focus on dialogue, but also because it has to lead to action. I see that Intissar is not moving her head heavily. So you agree on this? What do you think about this, Intissar?
Well, yeah, I think Hajar knows my views on sort of interfaith dialogue. I definitely think that dialogue is, you know, a good place to start, because, you know, the Quran says also, you know, so that you may know one another. You know, we have to, you know, diversity is there so that we also get to know one another as different groups and different backgrounds. But ultimately, I think, yes, it's also about action, about taking common action around, you know, our issues. And I think, you know, the recent pandemic, you know, I don't want to talk about COVID, but the recent pandemic and the environmental crisis has also raised, I think, you know, the importance of shared action and common action, that these are problems that are way bigger than one community or one country or one continent. They're really challenges, I think, that have been sent, you know, to remind us that we are actually we have a shared humanity and we have shared resources that we have to manage in a way that is not selfish and egoistical. And I think spirituality and religion really plays a very important role here because, you know, really we've gone so far in terms of consumerism and materialism and kind of just thinking about the way people buy things and consume things these days. And religions actually have a very powerful message about you know, how actually we have been given these things as a trust, you know, by God. And so I think that, you know, interfaith dialogue is a great way, and action is a great way to come together around these shared principles. We don't have to agree on everything. You know, you can't work with people if you agree with everything they say, because that's not cooperation. You know, cooperation is sort of being able to identify something we agree on and that we want to work on together, and working on that. But at the same time, agreeing that we will disagree about, you know, different sorts of things. But I think also in the current context, I mean, I think it's important to work with other religions and religious groups, because we have such an issue, I think, with a kind of a certain type of fundamentalist atheism. I think that's sort of emerging in different countries. Which is a very aggressive kind of, like, you know, not atheism simply in terms of, you know, not believing in God, but also sort of really undermining religions and really sort of trying to denigrate religious beliefs and religious communities. So I think it's quite important in this context for faith communities to sort of stand together and to remind people that religion and religious values are relevant actually to today, and that lots of people still, you know, have strong religious values around the world, and that religious values do contribute. They actually are a driver. They're actually a motivator for people to be active citizens, to be good citizens, to be productive and contribute to their societies. And that's, you know, that's proven through organizations like FEMYSO. Is, you know, religion is actually, and religious values are driving us actually to be responsible citizens, to be contributing, to be active. And that's, I think, an important message that FEMYSO puts forward. And I think that FEMYSO is actually doing a great job in terms of putting forward, you know, young Europeans who are actually really sort of dedicated and talented and working hard in terms of trying to solve these collective challenges that we have.
Yeah. Beautiful points. Yes. So actually, we started with talking about the shrinking civil society. But what I hear from you actually is that we have to focus on what we have, and we have to see this as an opportunity to build bridges. So to focus on our partnerships about actually building on common grounds, as you mentioned before. I also actually talking about this subject and thinking about this subject, I also was thinking about there is the thing of rising Islamophobia in Europe. And there is a stigma growing about being active in Muslim student associations or organizations in general. At least that's something I experience, and I also see other students experiencing this. Me, for example, in the Netherlands, in the current environment, I don't know if you know about a situation, about the environment. But for example, I am as a student, and I know that from other students as well, we are hesitant in, for example, writing our activities in Muslim organizations on our CVs. So I really feel like what you mentioned before about atheism, about the view at religion. I really experience this also as what we talked about, the shrinking. So what would your advice be? How should we Muslim youth deal with this struggle? Should we be hesitant? Should we not be hesitant? What would your advice be? Hajar, maybe we can start with you.
Oh, that's a tough one to crack. I'm always I have two minds about this. If you asked me 5-6 years ago, I'd be like, just keep going, just keep going, just keep doing what you're doing. Tell everybody how Muslim you are, show people through your actions, continue to work. And I think 5 years down the line, I would probably say exactly the same thing, but with a little caveat. Sometimes we, as Muslim youth, are extremely passionate about our causes. And I think there is nothing wrong with that. And I think, we always need to be, and we always have to show parts of ourselves. And, whether it's in the way we dress, or whether it's in, the activities and actions that we take, or the causes that we follow. I think I would personally say now that do that, but also have hikmah when you do something. So let's not forget that when we talk to people, we talk to them with hikmah, with, as the Prophet ﷺ, reminded us of, talk to people as, as they will understand us. If you challenge an idea, challenge them in a way that they will understand. For example, you're writing a CV, write down all of those incredibly wonderful skills and all of that fantastic experience you have, but maybe write it a little differently. And I'm sorry to say that, with maybe not so much of, the Muslim dot and T, crossing your T's, but you can still show that you are a highly skilled, competent young person who has traveled through the civil society space, and who is willing to contribute to whatever space they are in. So, for example, if you have interfaith experience, you can put that down as part of, your collective action. It really depends on the context. And I still put FEMYSO down on my CV till this day, because FEMYSO is a huge part of my life, and and it created the person I am today. I wouldn't be doing a PDRA in a university or have worked in a humanitarian agency in a few different countries if I had not lived the FEMYSO experience. And when I say lived the FEMYSO experience, it was blood, sweat, and tears and no sleep. And that is what builds our characters. So even if we don't specifically put down something on our CV, let's not forget what actually got us there. So all of those skills and all of that, all those mannerisms and all of that hikmah and ability to manage and to be around people, let's not forget those kind of skills. So I definitely put it down. I think there's no room for us to change who we are. I think we should continue to be who we are, but we need to have hikmah as to how we portray that in the best light in whichever situation. And I'm not saying dilute yourselves. I don't think that's correct, because more than ever, we need to see the Muslim identity, but we need to see the correct, the balanced, the middle ground Muslim identity that is, inshallah, FEMYSO and all of us, inshallah, sitting here today. And that's what's extremely important from my perspective. And I'm sorry if I didn't answer your question, but that is just my perspective here.
You did, and thank you very much, because I take that as an advice. I think these are very fair points, because it's part of our identity, it's part of who we are, it's part of how we became who we are. So it has, I also think it has its right on on our CV if we have to apply for something. But of course, for everyone, this changes. But I was very curious about how you see this, also with your experience in FEMYSO with this. So Intissar, what is your view on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would really say I don't think that we can really live according to our values as Muslims and have a kind of individualistic approach, in the sense that, Islam is profoundly, I think, a social and a communal religion. So it's, to say I don't want to associate myself with, Muslim organizations or Muslim community in general, doesn't really fit with the spirit, I think, of our religion, because we have a balance in our religion between the individual, the personal, and the collective, that, part of worship, for example, is worshiping God by yourself, making dua, etc. But a very important part of it is also going to the mosque, for example. We have the word jama, which is the Arabic for the mosque, is a place that brings people together. And we have so many, hadith and verses, like yadullahi ma'a jama'a, the hand of God is with the group. The Prophet ﷺ says the lone sheep, will be, is more prone to be eaten. So really kind of isolating ourselves from the Muslim community and sort of trying to protect ourselves by saying, oh, I'm not too Muslim, or I'm not too involved with this organization or that organization, I think ultimately weakens all of us, because then we're just kind of lone sheep who can be picked off, and to use that metaphor. I think that also, I mean, if you look at, Hajar was mentioning, if you look at actually what you can gain from being active in Muslim organizations, is much more than you're going to lose in terms of, the risk that you might have. And I think, we had, like Hajar said, a lot of hard work, a lot of interesting sort of times and challenges. But also, I mean, we got so much back from being part of FEMYSO, in the sense that,
Zoom, it's a powerful tool that you may...
situations where you really learn very quickly and you develop a lot of skills. And that puts you at an advantage compared to other people who are, for example, looking for jobs because, they spent all their time sort of just studying. Whereas, we actually had experience of managing budgets of 100,000 euros, of managing teams of people in 8 different countries, of building relationships with European institutions, of teamwork, fundraising, strategic planning, communication, all the things that the FEMYSO teams, do. And they don't actually realize, you don't realize how much you're learning until you actually stop and you think, oh, wow, actually, I've done some really interesting things. And you can see that difference, when you start working, you can see the difference between people who've had sort of an experience in civil society organizations and those who haven't, because the skill set you get is just incredible. And so I think that, even if Muslim organizations, you can end up with, sometimes you can get sort of typecast or stereotyped, or it might cause some issues if you want to go into politics or if you want to go into particular types of organizations or media. At the same time, it gives you a lot. And I think also we need to keep in mind that, you need to also have tawakkul, you need to rely on God, if on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if you are, if a door is closed in your face because you were, associated with the Muslim community or a Muslim organization, well, that door might be closed because, God wants to open another door for you. And so I think it's important to have that kind of faith and that reliance, and not to kind of sit there and calculate every single step that we take, because in the end, Allah is the best of planners, as we know. And so you can sit there and plan your entire career and think that you're not going to take any risks, and then actually it doesn't work out as you planned. So I think that it's, when you're young, especially, is the time to learn, to take risks, to get yourself involved, of course, with wisdom, as Hajar was saying. Don't throw yourselves into all sorts of dodgy groups or organizations. But it's also the time to be creative. It's the time to explore. It's the time to, come up with new ideas. And I think organizations like FEMYSO are, really the school where you learn these kinds of skills that you're going to use later in life.
I take your advice with me as well, and I think other young Muslims will as well. It's a very interesting conversation, actually. Also, we are looking at the time, so we are coming close to an end, and I also want to focus on audience questions. So I think I see there is a question. I will read it out loud. So there are more and more policies introduced, such as prevent in UK and anti-separatism law in France, that definitely restrict and shrink the space for civil society organizations, specifically Muslim organizations. How do we deal with this, and how can the young activists be resilient to such institutional pressure? Who would want to react on that?
Yeah, I'm happy to share some thoughts. I think, coming from the UK is sort of a pioneer, unfortunately, in terms of Prevent, the program which is focusing on, preventing radicalization and extremism. And it's actually, it spread it throughout the world as a kind of good practice, which is very unfortunate because the communities that it's targeted at in the UK definitely wouldn't call it a good practice. And it's actually, it's served to weaken community relations a lot. And it puts, for example, university professors, teachers and others under this duty to kind of watch and survey and monitor their students and the young people they're in touch with, and report them if they're seen to be having any signs of radicalization. And of course, radicalization is very broadly defined to mean any kind of sign of religiosity. So I'm just defining it for people who don't know what Prevent is. I think that, the British experience is quite interesting in that you have a lot of Muslim academics who are coming up, who are criticizing Prevent. And so, there are groups of academics who've written books on the subject, who are working with non-Muslim academics to also raise the issues around Prevent. And so actually, there's been quite a lot of success in sort of pushing back against Prevent. And so you have even unions, like the biggest teachers union in the UK actually came out against Prevent and said that, this is not the role of teachers actually to be, monitoring their students and to be acting as police officers, because this undermines the trust that they have with their pupils and their students. And so I think that a very powerful thing is to work with organizations like trade unions, for example, who actually will, when they make a position, on this issue, will definitely have their voices heard because they're quite large organizations with connections to government. And so again, it's about building partnerships, I think, with people who are like-minded. And building partnerships actually takes place, it's not something where, it happens in one meeting or two. It's really about building personal relations and relationships with these organizations. And that means getting involved. And so I would say, that means really one of the best things we can do is get involved as citizens, get involved in mainstream organizations. Join your trade union if you are working, or your student union if you're a student. you know, and because you can't just go to them when you need something, you know, because then it's a bit too late to get involved, although it's never too late. But the ideal is that you would already be, you know, sort of a member, you'd be contributing to general sort of discussions, so that when something happens that affects the Muslim community in particular, you already have allies on your side who you've built personal relationships with. So I think that's quite important. Hajar, do you want to add anything?
No, I think the summary of prevent and kind of the outcomes of kind of partnerships has been, you've done a really good job of. I think for me, the latter part of how can the young activists be resilient to such institutional pressures? Well, let's look at it from the Islamic perspective. You know, look at the prophets, look at the Salihin, look at how we are living during COVID, for example. Resilience is central to Islam, because resilience is what? Tawakkul ala Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you know, making sure that our worship is correct, continuously taking action, and knowing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to ease these things. So just to look at it from that perspective, you know, similarly, I think even talking about, you know, resilience, you know, even if you look at the Quran and it says, you know, you're going to be tested with, you know, something of fear and hunger and the loss of wealth and lives. Look at what's happening with us in terms of the pandemic. I think there's nothing worse than what we are living through. We have not lived through anything like this. Whereas when it comes to, you know, these new policies and institutional pressures, well, I think this is where we rely on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, our deen, being informed, being educated, and partnering with those that will help our cause. And I think the minute we stop working, the minute everybody else starts winning. But when we are working and there is this shocking pushback and policies, it means we are actually doing something, inshallah, bi'idhnillah, that is on the right path. And not everybody is, obviously, but we hope that via FEMYSO and such organizations that, you know, we are able to combat these issues. And Intissar rightly said it, academics are coming together to say, hello guys, this is not working, this is not correct. You know, they are deconstructing the problem and helping us somewhat to solve it. And I think that's where advocacy comes in, that's where adaptability comes in, that's where resilience comes in. Because if we are, every single time somebody is going to, like, you know, call us a name or push us to one side, and we start, you know, to ease away from our Islamic duty of, you know, bringing peace, inshallah, you know, to this world, well, what, you know, what's going to happen then? So I think for me, it's about understanding that everybody is tested, and this is our test, whether it's via policy, whether it's being stuck in our homes during COVID. This is our test, and we have to look at it from that Islamic lens, that building our resilience now, inshallah, protecting our organizations on our agency and advocating and representing is, inshallah, going to carry for our children's children, you know, or, you know, if you're an auntie, probably it's a different kind of a way in there. But I mean, I think that's really important, because, you know, they easily can scare us, they easily can write policies, but what happens? Look at history, look at where, you know, injustices occur, things are turned on their head, and I think we need to just have lots of sabr and try and work on our adaptability, and through such partnerships and education, inshallah, bi'idhnillah.
Thank you both for this these valuable advices, and it's really good, and to reflect on it on a religious perspective. Yeah, I think we have to let this sink in, all of us, the listeners as well. Thank you a lot, both Intissar and Hajar, for this session, for making time for it, for sharing your knowledge, your reflections, your experiences. I think we can take a lot from it, and we can reflect on it, inshallah. So before we end this session, I also want to thank everyone listening right now and also later on via the podcast. And see you inshallah in the next FEMYSO Now session. Until then, we also have other events that you can attend. So tomorrow we have the Eid gathering in collaboration with our dear partner ARDI. And Saturday we have the first digital European Muslim Careers Fair at 1 p.m. So don't forget to register. You can find the link literally everywhere. You can just check out our FEMYSO social media profiles, and inshallah see you there. So I actually want to end again. Thank you, and yeah, have a nice evening. And assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum. And also we want to thank the team behind the scenes as well. I think you've done a great
Indeed.
job, and Arietta and the communications team and the team who are working on 25 years of FEMYSO. Mashallah, great job.
100%.
Assalamu alaikum.